I said, not my face. This was a bee building year. I said, it's the same one. I don't want to kill you, but you got to get up my face. So it's just coming back to my face. Hey everybody. So this week, Pastor Chase was talking about a few different things in the sermon that really kind of struck me. And it kind of paired up with a lot of what's going on here in the bee yard. It might be a kind of weird thing for you to think about. But I have this conversation often, and in a short conversation with somebody, you know, kind of a 30-second sales pitch kind of situation. It's really hard to explain what I mean by this, but the life of a bee, the colony order, and just kind of the general function of a honeybee, it's so fascinating to me. And I definitely see a lot of parallels in kind of the design and the general function of a honeybee hive, a honeybee colony, and really how it is similar to the life of a Christian. And so a couple of things that he was talking about this week, like I said, definitely kind of hit home just because of where I'm at with our bee yard and kind of what's going on here in our operation. So I thought I'd share just kind of what's going on here in our bee yard, and really just kind of give it an opportunity to share, I guess, some of those insights on what it means, you know, for us, and what I mean about the fact that these bees, these bugs in a box, can really just teach us so much about our faith and different aspects of a life of a Christian. So one of those things that kind of hit home for me was when Pastor Chase was talking about the church being rebuilt. The story that he shared was basically this church was being built. I don't think he shared where it was necessarily, but church that was being built from stones. So these stones were being taken out of a prison yard or off of the property of a prison, and it was being built into a church. And as they were sifting through all the rubble and all the rocks and everything, there was a canister, and inside of that canister was a note. And that note stated something along the lines of that these stones were once what made up a church, and their prayer was that those stones would then be future pieces of what would be a church again someday. And obviously when they were building that, they had no idea, right? So when the idea of them taking those stones to build a church, they didn't know that note was going to be found. And so it's just so fascinating. And so as he's kind of going through that, you know, these little thoughts come through my mind. And it's not like I'm sitting in church thinking about bees, you know, so these things just, I do believe things happen for a reason. I don't think that our minds wander always for, you know, in a fault-driven way. And I think that was the case for this. I think that the parallels of what's going on here on our bee yard and some of those practical applications certainly there's parallels can be drawn, and it can help us to live a better life and be, you know, more intentional about some of the things that we do. So one of those things is, you know, Pastor Chase talked about that, but then he also continued on, and it was shortly after that, but there was a scene of where we meet for church. So a large building, a large high school, where there's just like this overhead view, and then on the front of it is the word entrance with an arrow pointing into one door, which is where we typically come in. And that's the case for a honeybee hive. There's typically one entrance, there's a vent in the top, and you know, there's different types of hives, but the most common Langstroth hive design is basically you have one entrance, and that's done practically. But it was just so interesting. I won't go into the weeds on that, but I thought that was so interesting because, you know, you see that diagram and it's like, well, that's a honeybee hive. You got an entrance coming in and an exit going out. And that's exactly what you see these bees doing, right? Bees are coming in, bees are going out. But in that, it struck me because I was like, man, that's kind of what it is at church, right? Like we go in and we're fed and you know, oftentimes described as that's kind of an inhale moment. And then we go out into the world and we exhale, right? It's a little bit of the opposite here in a honeybee hive, but still the application is still, it's still there. And so I just thought, okay, so these bees, you know, to answer these questions, when someone says like, I was at VBS a few weeks ago, and one of my friends, we were just chatting, and ultimately I kind of just shared like, oh, you know, we're talking about the bees and how they were doing this year and that kind of thing, and then it's just, you know, the excitement comes out, and I'm just like, man, I'm so excited about these bees. They're just so fascinating. And then again, I drew that parallel that I believe this teaches us so much about our faith. And one of the guys there is just like, how so? Like, tell me specifically. And man, it's really hard to fully encapsulate that. It's hard to really share what that means without knowing just generally how the bee operates. How does a honeybee operate? And so again, I can't elaborate too deeply on that, so this would be a long video. But basically, as you see these bees coming and going, they're doing a few different things. So these bees are going out and they're foraging either nectar that they're going to soon turn into honey, or pollen, which is their protein. Those are two essential things that they need for a colony to survive. That's what they're using not only for their own fuel, but that's how they're raising bees. That's how they're raising the next generation of bees that are coming into the hive. And so they're going out of necessity, right? So they're going out to forage. That's an instinct that God gave them. They're born knowing that there's certain steps that are taken, right? They don't go forage as soon as they emerge out of the cell and be, you know, are a full-grown bee. They don't just automatically start flying around, and there's steps that are taken, certainly, but the reality is they're not reading self-help books or how-to videos on YouTube or anything like that to get the understanding of what they need to do to survive. They just know that God gave them that instinct, gave them that knowledge. And so they go out, they do these things, but guess what? The cool thing is, while they're out doing that, it's not only self-driven. They're actually doing so much for so many things, as well as for us. We're included in that. So these bees are fantastic pollinators. And so while they're going around collecting nectar and pollen, they're also pollinating those same plants that they're on, whether that is a crop, whether that's a fruit or vegetable that we would enjoy, whether it's flowers that we get to look at. But the reality is, no matter what it is, even if we don't necessarily have a direct impact, you know, if it's not a fruit or vegetable that we're going to consume and give us fuel directly, it's increasing those pollinating plants, which again then refuels their ability to go out and have more nectar and pollen, right? So they're doing these things, but everything they touch, they leave their mark on in a positive way, right? So they're pollinating for themselves. They don't know that, right? But they're pollinating for themselves, for their future ability to have these things as they're growing these crops, as they're growing these pollination stations, things like that. And that's how it should be with us in our Christian walk, right? As we go out into the world, that's what we're called to do, right? We're called to go out and make disciples. That's the Great Commission, right? So we go out, and our job is to leave an impact wherever we go, whatever that looks like, whether that's at work, at the grocery store, at school, whether that's in your community, in your neighborhoods, walking down the sidewalk, whatever that looks like, we should be leaving a positive impact wherever we go. And I just think it's so fascinating, just kind of those parallels, those correlations, and then, just to kind of dive even a little deeper. So like what I'm going to be doing here on the Vineyard and kind of some of those thoughts that were going through my head during the sermon is just, how these applications tie in. So this is a colony that's doing pretty well. They were a split, so this was just a single. This is two boxes sitting here. So it was a split that we made probably about 4 weeks ago or so. This is where they started in this box. They grew to a size where I could go ahead and expand that. I threw this box on top, just more out of necessity. Robbing, of course, is a concern right now. So with non-honeybees coming in and, yellow jackets being one of those, European hornets, we have pretty fair amount of those. So they're coming in, they're saying, hey, you got some yummy food and we want that. So they're coming in to attack, and so we want to reduce that as much as possible. So I just threw this on top of there. But now they're getting to the point where the nectar flow is kicking back in, and so I'm gonna take this down. I'm gonna reduce this down into a single. It's gonna be a 10 frame box, and so with that, it was just fascinating because just like we kind of drew that parallel of the church, right? You can take every one of these bees, you can put them into a different hive, a different box, if you will, or a different church in the application. And the bees are still going to do what they're supposed to do, right? It doesn't really matter to them necessarily. There's certainly some studies and drawbacks and positive advantages of where they're at in here. And I think that's true for us in the church too. But the reality is they're going to function. They're going to do the same things in this box, whether they're stacked like this, whether they're in a deep like this over here, whether they're stacked too high. Again, it doesn't really matter all that much outside of those normal variables. Like, yeah, we wouldn't stack 10 boxes high for something like this. Of course, that's too much room and, robbing, and they can't protect that kind of space and those kinds of things. So there's variables that we won't get into, but the reality is the setup of the box doesn't really matter. What it looks like, whether it's colored, whether it's not colored, whether it's homemade, whether you bought it at the store, it doesn't really matter. And that's one of the beautiful things about our church, I think, is that we are still a church plant. And so Pastor Chase did talk about that as well, and how to some people, not having an established home, not having a place that has our name on the front of it, doesn't really matter all that much, right? Because we can still do those necessary functions that we're called to do, even in a place like that, in a school of all places. And as a matter of fact, there's so much more advantage to doing that because we can now give in a different way. We can be seen in a different way, right? We can be seen by somebody that wouldn't naturally come to a church, but maybe they're coming to a sporting event that happens to be on a Sunday morning, and maybe they're going to come back next week because of what they saw or because of an interaction that they had with somebody. That's some of those layers. That's some of those things that just draw me to honeybees. There's so many applications that we can pull from a little bug like this that God has created so perfectly, not only for their own well-being, because he did that, right? He gave them the necessary instruction ingrained in their being to be able to survive on their own, right? To be able to, we don't have to keep these bees to keep them alive. They will live out in a tree or in some other cavity out in nature. But the reality is we do this because we can control it a little bit better. We can help them. We can supplement for them. We can split maybe where they wouldn't have naturally split. So that's increasing numbers and supply and things like that. So intervening like this in a positive way when done properly is a very, very good thing. So I'm not downplaying that. But in the reality of things, this bee doesn't need me to survive. It doesn't need, if it swarmed out and went and lived somewhere else, it would survive even without my intervention. So these are the kinds of things that I think about, that God so perfectly created these little bugs and we can learn from them, but also they can help us. So it's really cool. So that's just one of those ways. I'm thinking I'll probably just kind of break these down into little segments like this, and because it's so fascinating to me, and I know people genuinely want to see what that's like, to just have this draw to these little bugs. Some people are just totally terrified. It's funny. I remember when I was talking to Amanda, so Pastor Chase's wife, about when we were just getting started in bees. And I remember her just kind of asking, because we were just moving to into the area that we're in now, and I was just explaining to her what we were going to be doing, and just about the bees themselves. And I just remember her response was, "Wow, that's so exciting for you." And I had to laugh about that, just because it's not for everybody, and I totally get that. Most people are not going to just sit here and stand in front of a honeybee hive. But I will say a lot of it is the same fear why somebody wouldn't come and sit with their face 12 inches from a honeybee hive as they're flying in and out. That same fear is what a lot of Christians have about the life that we're called to live. And I am saying that I'm guilty of that as well. So we get so hung up on what it looks like to do the right thing. We get hung up on whether we'll do it well enough or do it right. Well, I want to be an encouragement to you that, again, another lesson from these bees, they know what to do, not because of their own doing, but because God has given them the strength, the being, the ability, the chemical makeup, the intellect to do what they need to do to survive. So these bees are so fascinating. And so I would just want to encourage you in some of those ways. We're getting a little bit of rain, so I don't know how much longer they're going to let me hang out here before I start breaking into them. And matter of fact, I've got a queen that I got to get installed as well. So we got to get this queen and her attendants over into another hive here shortly before it starts raining. I didn't know it was going to rain until later. But I hope that's an encouragement to you. And I want to continue to encourage in different ways just about how God has used these little creatures to just showcase not only His creation to me and to many others, but really just to draw near to Him and give practical application to the life that we're called to live. Because I do believe that when you have your head stuck down into one of these hives and you just watch how they function, as you watch how they will give their life for the better of the colony. It's funny, Darlene and I were actually just talking a couple days ago. She was listening to a podcast, and it kind of struck her as just one of those kind of aha moments, right? You have those every once in a while. And look at that, there's a little European hornet that's getting attacked by one of our bees. Good job, bees. So, but that moment where somebody said, busyness isn't bad. Matter of fact, we're in a lot of ways called to that busyness kind of through the fall, right? Working would be toilsome. But what the problem is the hurry. The hurry is where it's the problem. And that's some ways how we try to help with these bees, right? Because if you watch these bees and they're busy, right? You obviously heard the busy bee, that comes from a honeybee. They do. If you stick your head down in one of these hives, they're all very busy. Lazy bees do not stay alive very long. A busy bee will survive. And so busyness is okay. It's the hurried nature of our life. It's the distractions. It's the things that we're busy doing that we shouldn't be doing. That's the real problem. And I just thought that was such a great parallel, and it is a truth that we need to really kind of differentiate between busyness and hurry. I know there's a lot to be said about that, but so again, I think that there's a lot of applications for these bees and how we can learn from them. We can grow closer to God through these bees. And just like anything, there's no exact substitute. There's no exact recipe, right? I'm not what I'm not saying, please don't hear me say that a honeybee hive is an exact representation of the Christian life, or that because there's one queen in here that represents Jesus. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, just like Jesus used parables to help his disciples and to help people understand, he would use those parables about things that people understood. And I genuinely believe that the life of a honeybee is a living and active parable, if you will. Something that if you're close enough to it, you can really see it and you can learn from it. And that's really what I mean when I say that so I'm super passionate about honeybees. I love them. I think they're super fascinating. To watch them work, to watch their ability, I mean, it speaks so loudly to the creator of the universe. You know, there's the saying about seeing the creation of the world and the universe, right? You've got the galaxies, the massive, massive wide scale, and then you go down to that atom, that really, really finite and almost invisible microscopic, element. Well, this is in between. This is somewhere right in between that, but we can certainly see God's amazing creation through something like this, through a honeybee. So again, please don't hear me say this is a direct representation or this is everything that there is. And, a honeybee, yeah, they do sting. A lot of people, that's one of the biggest reasons why people don't like honeybees, because they hurt. If you bother them, they hurt. I'm not saying that that's how we should live, right? I'm not saying that if someone hurts you, you go sting them and cause pain to them. That's not what I'm saying. So again, there's no exact representation, but through the life of Jesus and understanding all that means. But again, what I am saying is that we can take something like this, and there's plenty of other things that God has created for the same purpose. But I think very highly of these little bugs in a box. And I'm thankful to be able to have the relationship with them that I have, and just to steward them. I pray that I'll steward them well. I try to do that. But I just want to bring you along a little bit for the journey, and like I said, really just kind of explain in a little bit more detail with a little bit of up close of what these bees mean to me, and just generally how the answer to that question, right? How do these bees represent to me the life of Jesus and the life of a Christian in reality is really what I mean by that. But I'll leave you with one thing. One thing that I was also kind of came from the message that I just happened to never really thought about. But I thought about the question, what is the most important thing for a honeybee to do? If the honeybee didn't do anything else, what would be the most important thing that it did? And I thought about all the answers people would give and what someone might think about that answer. And I figured that a lot of people would say, well, they make honey, right? That's what honeybees do, right? They make honey. And while that is important, that is essential for kind of, for their survival. That's their food source. That's how they're raising new bees, things like that. But the reality is, the better question is, what is it most important for the honeybee to do well? And that's raise new bees. So they could store all the honey and nectar and pollen and bee bread and all the things. They could do all of that really, really, really well. But if they don't make new bees well, the colony will fail. This honeybee has a life of about 6 weeks. And that's the same case for all these bees in this box. If a bee comes out of one of these cells today, which it will, many will, its time clock starts. The majority of its life, it's going to live inside of this box, working for the colony inside. And then toward the later part of its life, it's going to be one of these bees that's out here flying around. And with that, it's a short life. But that means they've got to be recreating this bee, right? So that queen has to be laying eggs. These nurse bees have to be taking care of that egg, the larva, and the brood stages. it's got to be growing. The hive has to continue to be growing because it's dying at the same time, at the same rate, depending on the season. And that to me just stood out because that's, again, what we're called to do, make disciples, right? We're called to go and make an impact. So that is really the most important part about this bee box right now. If they make all the honey and nectar, or they gather all the nectar and the pollen they need, they could fill this box full of it, but with no brood, the colony will be gone in less than 6 weeks because there won't be enough support. And eventually the last bee will die, leaving only the queen, which will have no support and will also die or leave the hive to die. So that is, again, a calling for us to go out, be part of what God has created for us, to go out, live on mission, go and make disciples. That's the calling of a Christian. And these are words that I wrestle with because I don't do well for this either. I have the same distractions. I have the same self-limiting thoughts. I have the same fears and concerns as a lot of people do in regards to this, but I'll tell you, I want to be an encouragement, and I want to not only encourage myself in these ways every time I open these hives, but I want to share that encouragement with you, that God has created you for a purpose, and that purpose is to make His name great through the impact that you have in your life, and the people and the circles and the different groups, the different organizations, the schools, the works. I mean, literally, like I said, anywhere you can be a resource for the kingdom. You can be an impact on someone's life in a positive way, beyond measure, in a way that nothing else could do, right? This is the only thing that really matters, is where somebody stands in light of eternity. Where do we stand in light of eternity? That's the question. But like I said, I'll leave you to it. I just wanted to show you kind of what I thought here. So now we'll bust into these boxes. I'm realizing I grabbed a medium super, and these are deeps. So I'm gonna go grab a deep, and we're gonna throw this on there, and then we're gonna go install a queen. So we gotta get to this before all these bees come in here and start robbing my hives, and maybe before it rains. So I hope that was an encouragement to you guys. Be the light. Be the lighthouse, as Greg Burns would say. Go out into the world, make an impact, and be the change that you want to see in this world. Let's get to it. So I'm actually gonna just go ahead and leave that. They've got plenty of room up here in the top, and this is gonna be perfectly fine. They're doing okay with this. I thought they were gonna be drawing this out a lot faster. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave it in here for a little while, and then we will transition this in later. So we'll head up on the upper bee yard now, and we'll get this queen put into her hopefully final resting place, and let her get to work up there here in a few days. So let's head on up there. All right, we're gonna see how this one goes. I'll probably have to suit up for this one, but what we're gonna try to do right now is take this queen, put her into this box right up here. So you can see this is separated. This box is a colony, and then we have these lower two are its own colony. So we have these kind of stacked up here. But this one's a lot healthier, so it's just queenless. So a lot more bees in it than the ones we saw down below. And with that rain, I don't think they're gonna be super happy I'm in here. So we'll probably have to veil up for this one just so they don't go crazy, but we'll see what their temperament is. I'm definitely gonna put gloves on, well, we'll see what happens here. Let's get this out of my way here. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this off first here. This is our top frame feeder here. So this colony, well, all of these bees actually, we left them for the summer because once it gets to a certain point in the year, you got to be really careful because of all that robbing that we talked about. You got to really reduce how much you're in the bees. And so with that, during that time, this is really the hardest time for the bees in terms of like, especially queens. So queen loss is a little higher this time of year. So we hadn't been in them other than treatments for really a while now. Just actually finished up with treatments, so I've got to get in and do some mite washes pretty soon here. But because of that, because we're kind of leaving them to their own, it also means that we don't exactly know what's going on in those hives. So I just got in here, we started inspections back up probably about a week or two ago. And that's when we found out this hive rather was queenless. So with that, we want to make some changes. So we're gonna slide that in. You've probably seen me do these videos before, so I won't bore you with that, but we're basically gonna make sure that candy is up toward the top. These bees are already all over it. We did put in some brood, that's super important. If your hive goes queenless, and you basically have to wait on a queen unless you're rearing your own queens, you want to make sure you got to get brood on them. So what I did was I took a frame of brood out of another colony and basically swapped frames. That way they felt that they had supplies that they needed. I thought I put it in this side, but apparently not. So we're gonna find out where I put that. And I was in here a couple days after that and saw that they were making sure I'm in the right colony here. They were already working that cell, that queen cell. So with that, you know, we want to, yeah, so they're coming after me now. I kind of thought they would. They don't really like me messing around in there, and I don't like getting stung in the face. So we'll go ahead and veil up here. But so, like I said, right now, I just want to make sure to get in there because they did have a queen cup. And I want to stop them from doing that. Because what I don't want to have happen is I don't want to put this queen in there, them release it, and then all of a sudden this virgin queen takes over and kills the queen I just purchased to put in there. It's very important because this time of year, especially with the impact that we have, and we have swallows and dragonflies like you wouldn't believe this year. And so with that, I want to make sure that I'm you know, we're not going to produce our own queens here because they just probably wouldn't make it. Yeah, they're not too happy. Like I said, we got rain coming in. I didn't think that they would be. I'm surprised it took them this long. All right, we'll just get a little extra protection here since my hands are down in here. So right now, all I'm trying to do is find that queen cup. I thought it was right on the end, but I've been working a few different hives and swapping resources, so it might have been a different one. So we're gonna go ahead and, since they're getting irritated, I'm gonna try to work a little faster here. I was just kind of taking my time. There we go. So here's that nice heavy brood frame. And you can see they've actually already closed off that queen cell. So what I'm gonna do there, well, since they've been working so diligently on that, I'm actually gonna let this ride. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get back in here later, and I'm actually gonna pull this cell out of here. And we'll throw it in a split. No, I don't wanna do that. I'm telling you, it's not gonna work. I'm wasting my time here. It's so late in the season. So what we gotta do is, yeah, they worked hard on it, but it's one cell, not a big deal. We've gotta come in here, we've gotta squish that. Because we're saying, hey, look, I'm sorry, but I do not want you to make that queen. Because I've got you a new one. So now we've gone ahead and gotten rid of that cell. You can see we've got kind of a combination of capped brood, eggs, larvae. Sorry, we got a car going by there. But you can kind of see them working that out. So they knew they had no queen, but they knew they had the resources. So right now, because they are so fast at making that cell, they know they need a queen bad. That means they're probably gonna accept this queen pretty easily. I could probably release her out of that cage right now and they would accept her, but it's okay. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna go ahead and let them release her naturally. So it's sad, you know, I hate to squish a queen and a little baby bee, but the reality is it would only wreak havoc on my hive. So you can see there, I don't know if you can see that or not. You can see the larva right there. And then of course this was the cell. So it's growing pretty fast. The queens grow pretty fast. Okay, but not fast enough. Not fast enough for us to keep moving. This time of year, we do not have time to mess around. And honestly, at this point in the year, it's really, in our area in Ohio, it's too late to really be trying to do that and do it well. So mated queens are the way to go. Because even once that queen is emerged from her cell, you've got a few weeks before she goes and gets mated, comes back, starts laying eggs. We just don't have time for that. So the reality is, even if I wanted to do a split, the only reason I would have kept that was as an extra queen, and I could have definitely done that. That's like a resource hive. But honestly, I could do that with a better supply. When I pulled that frame, I didn't really select it from genetics. I just simply grabbed a frame from the next hive, threw it in there because I knew I needed brood right away. And so that's kind of, you know, if I'm gonna have them make a queen, even for a resource hive, then I want to make sure I pick something that I like the genetics on. Something that has a good temperament and has proven itself. But like I said, we really don't need to do that this time of year. At this point, I'm trying to just stabilize, trying to keep with where we're at, keep our numbers and keep them healthy and keep them happy. So that's kind of the goal. That's where we're at. So really from here, I got to do mite washes. This is my next move, and hoping for zeros on that. Been treating. Like I said, we just ended our treatment schedule for these, and now I just got to make sure that everything's good. The beekeeping calendar really is fiscal year starts now, so August is where the success of colonies over winter and into the spring and beyond is really now. So making sure these bees are healthy, strong, fed, good queens, super important. So that's really where we're at. We'll see where we're at honey wise. I don't expect to take any more honey off of these. We only did one pool this year. Oops, I said not my face. This was a bee building year. I said it's the same one. I don't want to kill you, but you got to get up my face. All right, so there was a bee out there. It was right next to really one of our more aggressive hives. The colony that we were working, the hive next to it, it's not a super nice colony. Very well performing, and that's unfortunately how it goes with bees a lot of times. Usually the more aggressive they are, the better doing their job they are. Essentially, they've got a lot to lose, and so their aggression comes out through that. Sometimes, not always, because there's really some great, well-performing hives that are super gentle and docile. That's what we want. So actually, I wanted to requeen that hive just because of how temperamental it was. I didn't end up getting around to it. I've been in it a few times since, and honestly, this most recent time, a week or so ago, when we got in for our kind of into summer beginning inspections again, they were great, super gentle, and so sometimes they work themselves out, and that's kind of what I was hoping for, but we'll see how it goes. I will be breaking them down pretty soon, probably in a month or so, kind of breaking those hives down, and so we'll see where they end up with the new queen or not, but the reality is they've just gotta ride it out. If they continue to be aggressive, they'll definitely get a new queen, if not this year, in the beginning of next year. But you know, the goal is with all of these is just to get them through winter. So I don't want to spend a lot of money and energy on them. The main thing is just keeping them stable and keeping them fed, keeping them growing and producing. So that's kind of where we're at right now in our operation. Again, we're very small scale in all of this, but again, just want to bring you along for the ride, kind of show you what we got going on this week. So that's all I got for right now. Next move is mite washes, and we got to get some equipment ready to be put out in the yard. So we got some work to do still. I don't think I even have any more deeps. We're actually moving out of deeps. I'm going to start moving operation into more of a super like medium heavy type equipment. So we'll run some deeps, but mainly my reasoning for that is uniformity, being able to swap frames easier without having to sift through. That's going to be more important on the smaller ones. So on splits and some of the smaller colonies, but especially even in the spring and in the fall, maybe even, but definitely in the spring, where maybe you don't have as much resources, and maybe you don't have some of those resources in a deep, but you need deeps because that's the box you're running, or vice versa. Maybe you need mediums, you're doing a split, you need a bunch of mediums, but all your brood's in deeps. Well, that's not going to work. So you got to kind of be more strategic about it. I mean, yeah, sure, you could throw 2 mediums to make the deep with a bunch of extra room temporarily. It's doable, but again, then you're just fighting that problem later when you've now still got brood on all of those and you're trying to sift through it. So really just trying to consolidate down into a little bit more of a uniform operation with the goal of making things just more easy and streamlined. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm not sure that if I'll regret that later, we'll see, but that's kind of the goal. We're gonna move to that, see where we land. And if we change our mind and wanna go back to some deeps, that's not that difficult. We can do that. We can throw deeps together. Right now, I see the biggest problem is deeps are my nukes. So that's gonna be, as you just saw in the lower B yard, is I've got deeps for my nukes, and now I'm trying to transition those into full hive bodies, and the problem is I gotta have the deeps to do that. So that could be a challenge, but I could see overcoming that by just putting mediums in while they're in that kind of nuke stage, because they're not going to have the resources to be drawing out a bunch of extra comb unless it's springtime and the nectar flow is super heavy and resources are abundant. Then they're not going to really see that as being a problem. But so that's where we're at. So that's kind of what we're doing here. So yeah, I'll leave you with that, and we'll see you for the next one. All right. Have a great day, guys.